Hello, my name is Andrew Chang, and this presentation is a project for my Global Environmental Health class here at New York University. This presentation focuses on lead exposure, its pathways, and its health effects. We take a closer look at this topic by breaking down lead exposure into location, susceptibility, and prevention on the primary and secondary level. The purpose of this presentation is to understand where and what are the sources of lead in the environment, how exactly lead affects your health, breaking down lead exposure by sectors, and how to decrease lead exposure. We first start by learning about lead exposure by finding where it is in the environment, what are the sources of lead, and what products may contain lead that we use every day. Afterwards, we look at the health effects of lead exposure and how it exactly gets into our body. We then look to where lead exposure is more prevalent in the United States by observing states and regions. Later, after finding which state and/or region has the most lead exposure, we dive into specifics such as neighborhoods, race, and ethnicity. It should be noted that we get more specific as this presentation unfolds. Lead can be found in various areas within the environment, such as air, dust, soil, water, and food. Lead can get into the air by metal processing areas, the leaded aviation fuel used by most aircrafts, waste incinerators, lead acid battery manufacturers, and lead smelting areas. Lead can also be found in the form of dust as well. For example, most older homes use lead-based paints, but as time passes, the paint chips and breaks down ultimately into a fine dust. This is very problematic considering dust can be found almost anywhere. Lead can also be found in water as well. We usually find lead in water due to old and corrosive pipes that bring water into our homes. It also can be found within soil and food, as lead is naturally found within soil, and therefore it should come to no surprise that lead can be found within our food. The graph to the right shows percentages of lead exposure through air, dust, soil, water, food, and other sources. Over 50% of lead exposure is attributable to dust and soil, which should come to no surprise as we know that dust can get anywhere. It should be noted that these numbers can fluctuate from area to area. In the previous slide, I briefly mentioned some sources of lead. Now we look to explore some other sources of lead exposure. Lead-based paint, recycling, smelting, mining, and batteries are other sources of lead exposure. Lead-based paint can be found within the walls of our homes and on children's toys. Recycling of scrap metals and other products may lead to sources as well. For example, when doing my research, I found that Amazon had to remove a recycled water bottle for sale because it may have contained lead. Smelting leads to lead being found in the air, mining leads to more dig-up of rock and soil that contains lead, and batteries are also a source of lead as well. So what are the common products that may contain lead? Paint, ceramic, toys, jewelry, lipstick, electrical equipment, pipes, PVC plastics, and more. Take a second to look at the photos below. Each of them are products that most people use every day that contain lead. Going from left to right, we see again lead-based paint. Next, we see lead-based pottery. This pottery is very beautiful. However, the glaze and ceramic itself have lead within them. Because of this, most people who drink and eat from these products are getting more than what they expected. Next, we have children's toys with paint again, lipstick, which really surprised me as a product that may contain lead. The next product is jewelry, and this photo is a traditional Buddhist bracelet with a prayer on it. I know this because I wear a very similar bracelet that I got from Vietnam every day. The next image is about pipes that contain lead, and lastly we have electrical equipment. This means that anything in our homes that has electrical cord could contain lead. Lead can get into the body through many pathways and sources, as we know. The graph to the left shows that lead can enter the body through ingestion, skin contact, and inhalation by using the various products as mentioned before. This causes blood lead levels to rise, which is problematic. Young children are especially endangered to lead exposure because they are more vulnerable and therefore are more likely to suffer from permanent damage. example of this is the development of the brain and the central nervous system and the musculoskeletal system. An interesting note to point out is that lead can seep into the bones, and when those bones break, lead is released into the blood, therefore causing lead poisoning. Lead can also cause long-term harm effects in adults as well. Most notably, effects are increased risk of high blood pressure and kidney damage. Now that we have discussed the sources and health effects of lead exposure, we look to where lead exposure cases are more prevalent within the United States, specifically with children who are under the age of 18. Blood lead levels greater or equal to 10 micrograms per deciliter are considered cases. As you can see, there is an encouraging downward trend of cases as the years go by. One interesting point to make is that one of these colors represent a region as opposed to a state. New York City represents the green bar, while the other colors represent other states. The only other state that comes close to New York City is Wisconsin. We now take a closer look at New York City by looking at each of the 5 boroughs. The graph to the left shows the amount of children each borough has and how much that represents the total number of children in New York City. As you can see, Brooklyn has the most children at 601,154 children, which represents about 34% of all kids in New York City. The graph to the right shows the proportion of children from each of the boroughs that have blood lead levels greater than 10 micrograms per deciliter. When you calculate it out, Brooklyn approximately has 264,507 children with high lead exposure. Next, we look to answer what race and/or ethnicity is exposed to lead the most. Similarly, in the previous slide, the first graph to the left breaks down the percent of all children in New York City, but this time we break it down by race and ethnicity. As you can see, Hispanic people are more prevalent than any other race/ethnicity in New York City. The graph to the right shows that 31% of all Hispanic children have blood lead levels greater or equal to 15 micrograms per deciliter, which equals to roughly about 101,838 children that have high lead exposure. A potential reason why Hispanic people may be overrepresented is because of their use of lead-based pottery. Their culture typically uses this type of pottery quite often and could be a factor into why they're overrepresented. In summary, we learned that lead is very prevalent in the environment. The sources and products that contain lead are everywhere, the health effects of lead, that lead exposure is everywhere, but it is declining, that certain races and ethnicity are more prone to lead exposure, and about prevention. Some prevention protocols that you could do is test your home for lead-based paint and dust, wash your children's hands and toys regularly, prevent children from playing in soil, use test kits that can tell you if your products contain lead. For example, in doing my research, I found a video of our professor, Caravanos, testing a pottery that he purchased in Harlem, I believe, or the Bronx, not too sure, but he ended up using a simple tool that basically showed that the product contained lead.